The chapel was broken long before the Stoßtruppen arrived. Shellfire had flayed its stone skin, leaving only jagged ribs of arch and steeple to claw at the grey sky. A shattered saint still hung high on the far wall, one arm missing, face eroded by acid rain. Beneath that mutilated effigy, the Prussians made their muster. The quiet of the ruin's interior was broken only by the rustle of gear, the clink of grenades, the distant groan of wind dragging across rusted wire. In the candlelight, their shadows stretched across broken stone like the ghosts of titans. These were not conscripts or green recruits, but hardened veterans of the Northern Front, men who had seen the frostbite flay flesh from bone and faced down war wolves in the howling dark. Their eyes were hard and unblinking, broad of shoulder and thick with muscle, their strength forged through years of brutal campaigns and ceaseless combat drills. Faces bore the weathering of northern winters, jaws set like stone, eyes scanning with quiet menace. They were the Duke's spear, the hand-picked elite, those with unshakable will shaped by fire and sharpened by years of unbroken violence. Their discipline was absolute, their will like tempered iron, unyielding and forged to match the armor they wore. Hauptmannsthal moved among them, his boots crunching on broken glass and ancient bone, his long coat torn at the hem and streaked with scorched oil and mortar dust, draped over the angular bulk of segmented armor beneath. The orichalcum plates fitted close to his body was forged for movement in the crawl spaces of war. A steel-faced helm covered his head, the lower half fashioned into a breathing mask that rasped faintly with every breath. He moved without a word, the coat trailing behind him like the edge of a burned banner. He said nothing, merely nodded to each man as he inspected their arms. Submachine guns with modified drum magazines, blades blackened to avoid reflection, belts heavy with fragmentation grenades. Corporal Krein knelt in the rubble, performing a final check over the trigger mechanism of his flamethrower. He could hear the man whispering to himself as he adjusted the flame. Nearby, another trooper smeared dark paste beneath his eyes and kissed the crucifix bolted to his trench club. On the other side of the chapel, a pair of engineers crouched beside a crate of demo charges and breaching tools. They whispered to one another in clipped dialects, checking blasting caps and drawing chalk symbols on the bricks they would carry with them to breach the outer bunkers. At the rear, the marksman checked the seals on his scope one last time, then slung the long rifle across his back with practiced ease. His spotter gave a silent nod and slipped a folded map into his coat. Together they crept out through a side door, vanishing into the night like wraiths. No one spoke above a whisper. Orders had been given hours before. The plan was etched into their minds like scripture. Each movement, each second, rehearsed a dozen times on far-off training grounds, beneath clearer skies where drills ran smooth and boots moved quick through dust and dry grass. Outside, the moon hung heavy and red above the distant heretic trenches, casting a dull, oppressive glow over the cratered landscape of no man's land. Figures drifted in the far distance, movements too steady to be smoke, too purposeful to be wind. They clung to the horizon like stains on a faded canvas, silhouettes that suggested heretic patrols or things of more bestial nature, stalking the killing grounds. Pyramid-shaped pillboxes loomed like the jagged teeth of buried titans. Their loopholes were pitch-black voids that promised death to any who drew near. The wind carried a rising heat and the stench of scorched oil and spoiled meat. A Feldkaplan entered the ruined chapel, tall as a tower, broad-shouldered beneath a full suit of heavily engraved and ornamented orichalcum plate armor. He moved with the slow, deliberate grace of a knight from legend, every step echoing with purpose. His censer swung like a flail of incense and iron, trailing veils of smoke thick with myrrh and ghostly ash that clung to the stone like fog in a forgotten vale. His voice was low, but his words were heard by each man who prepared for war in the chapel. Be as hammers in the hand of God. Let no sin remain standing. He intoned as he moved through the chapel. You are the iron will of the free state, clad in flesh and plate. Your blades are the teeth of judgment, your fire the breath of wrath. Tonight you do not strike as men, but as a storm sent to cleanse the earth. Steady your hands, sharpen your hearts. You are not alone. The gaze of heaven is upon you, and the damned will tremble beneath it. And then, silence again. The Stoßtruppen stood. Helmets were donned, rounds chambered, gloves pulled tight, final prayers mouthed. Many of the men touched personal relics, iron nails, bone fragments, saintly medallions dulled by soot and time. It was not superstition, but ritual, binding them to the cause, to one another. Each pair of eyes met Stahl's with silent conviction, the unspoken promise of men prepared to wade through hell and carve a path back out. The soldiers of the line, the regular riflemen, gunners, sappers, and others among the countless faithful under arms, were brave, devoted, and willing to do their duty. But even they were not immune to fear. The cold calculus of war lingered in the minds of most, its weight acknowledged, its toll accepted. Among the soldiers of the line, there was no shame in caution, no dishonor in a whispered prayer or a clenched jaw. They were steady in their duty, and when the time came, they did not falter. But the same frailty was not to be found in these men, not the Stoßtruppen. There was no hesitation, no glimmer of doubt, only stillness, and within that stillness, a fire, not the frantic blaze of panic, but the low, deliberate burn of will sharpened by years of brutal campaign. A quiet, focused eagerness lived in their gazes, an itch to close the distance and end the enemy by hand. In the Stoßtruppen, there was no trembling, no hesitation. A quiet hunger burned in their eyes, an eagerness not merely to fight, but to face the enemies of the Free State of Prussia, eye to eye, and extinguish them. They stood with the posture of wolves, scenting the wind for prey. The fact that some among them would die tonight did not daunt them. It was expected, accepted, even welcomed. Death was a coin long since spent. What remained was the violence they would inflict before paying it. With a fire in his heart that matched the men arrayed before him, Stahl gave a salute. The Duke's spear would fly tonight. The chapel emptied in disciplined silence, its last embers of candlelight flickering as shadows poured out through broken doorways and shattered windows. One by one, the Stoßtruppen slipped into the night, their boots making no more sound than the falling ash drifting from the broken sky. The columns split and scattered without command, every movement already rehearsed to perfection. Each fire team peeled off toward its assigned approach, disappearing into trench gullies, crater lips, and dead man paths carved through the muck. Captain Stahl moved with them, his long coat catching the night wind, his respirator hissing gently. The air beyond the chapel was colder, tainted with the sour reek of heretic fumes. A low mist had begun to creep in over the mudflats, shrouding the no man's land in a veil of ghostly grey. It would serve. From broken trenches and camouflaged shell holes, the Stoßtruppen observed. Through scopes and slitted visors, they studied the heretic lines. Spotlights swung sluggishly across the field, their cones of light sweeping like the indifferent eyes of some slumbering god. Beyond them, the silhouette of a pyramid casemate jutted against the sky, studded with viewing slits and the dull shine of hell-forged metal. Flashes of fire and twisted silhouettes came and went in the distance, shapes moving without rhythm or sense, patrols of heretic infantry or worse. Still, the Stoßtruppen watched with unblinking focus. Every machine gun nest, every roll of cursed barbed wire, every unnatural glow from heretic trench lines was committed to memory. Crine settled into the charred stump of an old command dugout, eyes scanning through a broken periscope. Nearby, engineers finished wiring up a line of shaped charges beneath a mud-caked embankment. Their gloved hands moved with deliberate calm, sealing fuses beneath tar cloth as they waited for the order that would turn their charges into breaches. Above them all, the marksman had found his nest, a collapsed bell tower 300 meters forward and half sunken into the earth. He lay prone beneath the rusted beams, scope trained on a flickering lantern set just inside the enemy trench. The shadows clung to him like a second skin. And so they waited, scattered in shadow, steel heart steady, watching the breath of the enemy like hunters before the strike. The barrage would come soon, but for now, the Duke's spear lay waiting in silence. It began with a distant groan, low, deep, and rising like a dirge from the earth itself. A heartbeat later, the first shell screamed overhead, red streaks tearing across the heavens, before slamming into the heretic trench line with apocalyptic force. Fire blossomed, earth convulsed. The heretic bunkers, pyramid-shaped abominations of demon-welded iron and profane stone, were hammered by the opening salvos, engulfed in fountains of mud, flame, and debris. Though the blasts scarred their flanks and shattered the outer trenches, the pyramids themselves endured, their demon-wrought structures cracking but refusing to fall. Smoke curled from their seams like breath from wounded beasts. The Stoßtruppen didn't flinch. They had known the rhythm of artillery for years, its cadence as familiar to them as a prayer, its fury woven into the marrow of their trade. They moved. Stahl was the first into motion, raising one clenched fist in the flickering dark. The signal was simple, unmistakable, and like a dam bursting, the strike team surged forward. No Man's Land came alive in the hellish light. Grenades were primed mid-run, the pins already forgotten. Flamethrower teams hunched low, their nozzles glinting like the maws of dragons as they scurried between wire tangles and crater lips. Engineers with satchel charges sprinted beside shock troopers, wielding boarding axes and short, brutal entrenching tools. Blades honed not only for utility, but for violence, their grips wrapped in black leather. Overhead, the shrieking chorus of the next artillery wave passed like wailing angels. Crine roared his unit onward, flame unit slung tight to his back, eyes locked on a trench junction, now half submerged in fire. To his left, a trooper fell to shrapnel without a word, rolling to a stop in the black mud. But the line did not pause. Above in his nest, the marksman fired the first round. A heretic sentry collapsed over the trench wall, skull opened like fruit. Two more followed. The heretic line was still dazed, stunned by the weight of the barrage. But it would not last. Somewhere beyond the burning casemates, the enemy would be rallying, raising demons, preparing. The Stoßtruppen pressed forward. They were inside the teeth now, and they would strike until the jaw snapped shut, or broke entirely. The heretic trenches stirred. From the smoke-choked bastions of their blasphemous line, the first bullets of counterfire spat back across no man's land. A shriek of cursed metal tore through the mist, ripping a Stoßtrupp from his feet in a burst of gore and steaming mud. Hell guns chattered to life from the shadowed crests of their bunkers, their muzzle flashes strobing like infernal sigils in the dark. But the heretics were slow. The barrage had shattered their watchpost and disrupted their command. Many gunners fired blind into the fog, bullets whistling past the Stoßtruppen as they zigzagged through the broken terrain. One casemate opened up with a long burst, stitching the dirt behind Stahl's fire team. But by then, they were already vaulting into a crater. Tracer fire lit the mist in arcs of red and green. Some of it found flesh. A man went down with a cry and was pulled silently into cover by his comrade. No pause, no panic. The rhythm held. From the forward embankments, the heretics deployed flesh hounds, mangled things sewn with armor and shrieking in hunger, but they found no fear to feed on. The Stoßtruppen did not break, did not flee. They met the hounds head-on. Bullets cracked, trench blades swung, and the beasts fell howling into the dirt. They were built to terrorize, to feast on panic, but found only iron discipline and point-blank violence. Within seconds, they lay scattered in smoking heaps before the wire, as the Prussians surged past without breaking stride. And always above them, the sky screamed. The artillery did not cease. A new wave rolled in, closer now, shattering pillbox corners and sending waves of flame curling into the trenches below. The Stoßtruppen kept moving beneath its howl, racing the falling shells, diving into mud-filled ditches and rising again like revenants. Ahead, Krine's flamethrower team reached the outer parapet. With a single burst, he turned a heretic gunner into a silhouette of fire against the trench wall. The flame washed over the post, clearing the way. The Prussians were at the edge. The final leap loomed. Behind them, the last of the barrage was already falling. Before them, the black trenches of the damned. And the Stoßtruppen ran on, eager to begin their bloody work. They hit the trench line like a storm of steel and fire. Grenades arced overhead in practiced silence, bouncing once off blood-slick sandbags before exploding in teeth-rattling blasts. Screams followed, brief, high, and ragged. Then came the fire. Krine's flamethrower team surged forward, and with a hiss and roar, ribbons of burning gel fuel washed over the trench lip. Heretic silhouettes flailed, blackening against the trench wall before crumpling into ash and armor. The Stoßtruppen did not pause. They vaulted into the enemy trench with all the weight and violence of a falling executioner's axe. Submachine guns barked in short, brutal bursts. Blades punched through corrupted flesh. Trench blades hacked through armor, cloth, and the things that had once been men. Within seconds, it became close-quarters chaos. The heretics rallied in pockets, blind, wrathful, some still chanting prayers to their masters in hell, but the Prussians were already among them. Stahl's boots hit the trench floor as he opened fire, cutting down a pair of heretic gunners struggling to turn a belt-fed machine gun. Beside him, a stormtrooper slammed the butt of his pistol into a cultist's jaw, then drove his dagger under the ribs in one fluid motion. The air was thick with smoke and the choking reek of burnt meat. Screams echoed through the winding trench corridors, some human, some not. From a dugout mouth, a heretic priest bellowed a curse, only to be silenced by a thrown hatchet that embedded in his brow. The Stoßtruppen moved on, weapons slick, eyes clear. This was their element. The trenches twisted and curved, and the battle did the same, breaking into savage knots of melee and fire. Grenades continued to burst at choke points, and flame licked through the dugouts like avenging spirits. The Stoßtruppen advanced, not in a wave, but like a spreading infection, silent, sudden, and unstoppable. The resistance thickened with every meter gained. As the Stoßtruppen pressed deeper into the trench system, the heretics began to recover their footing. More organized volleys erupted from ahead, and snarling voices in half-human tongues rang out over the crack of gunfire. Stahl led his fire team through a narrow trench corridor, passing slumped heretic bodies still smoking from earlier bursts of flame. He rounded a corner just in time to see the muzzle flash of an enemy carbine. The round struck him squarely in the chest, then another and another. Each hit rang off his breastplate with a sharp clang, staggering him back a step. Sparks bloomed across his armor's etched orichalcum surface, but the plates held. Snarling beneath his breath, Stahl raised his weapon and returned fire, cutting down the shooter and ducking back to signal his team forward. Ahead, the trench widened into a long, straight killing ground. At the far end, a heretic barricade had been hastily constructed, plated shields of demon steel, shattered icons, and bodies heaped together to form a bulwark. From behind it, gunners poured fire down the trench like molten rain, forcing the Prussians to duck behind what little cover they could find. Stahl didn't hesitate. He signaled with a clenched fist and pointed. Grenades were already in hand. 3 were lobbed, 1 high, 2 skimming low. The first blast shredded the left side of the barricade. The second ignited a crate of ammunition with a gout of fire. The third sent limbs flying like rag dolls caught in a storm. The heretic fire faltered for the crucial heartbeat Stahl had anticipated. He and his Stoßtruppen surged forward. They hit the barricade with brutal force. One vaulted the wreckage and fired point-blank into a dazed gunner. Another plunged a bayonet into a robed zealot howling a sermon. Stahl himself tore through the gap with his pistol and blade, leading the slaughter with mechanical precision. As the last defender was silenced with a boot heel to the throat, the Prussians regrouped, breath steaming in the heat and haze. From their new position, the bulk of the heretic fortifications loomed ahead. The pyramid bunkers. Their blackened surfaces still hissed from the bombardment, and glowing loopholes pulsed with unnatural light. Whatever still lived inside them had not fled, nor would it. The way forward was steeped in warlock wards and cruciform scars cut into the steel. But the Stoßtruppen did not stop. With a fresh line formed and barrels checked, they pushed onward, into the heart of the heretic line, where the slave soldiers of hell waited behind bunker doors. They didn't make it far. The moment the Stoßtruppen advanced beyond the ruins of the barricade, the pyramid bunkers came alive. Their iron sides pulsed with glyphs etched in blasphemous scripture, and from within their mouths the heavy guns opened fire. The first salvo turned the lead Stoßtrupp into a red mist. A second round slammed into the trench wall behind Stahl, peppering him with splinters of stone and rusted rebar. He ducked low, pressing his back to the dirt. All along the Prussian line, momentum faltered. They were pinned. The bunker's fire was relentless, great rotary cannons and shrieking demon-fueled guns whose rounds exploded in bursts of hellfire. Dust and blood filled the air. Screams cut short, interrupted by the ruinous percussion of impact. But Stoßtruppen did not break. Stahl slammed a fist against the wall and gave the signal. A two-tone whistle. It echoed faintly through the trench din. Suppressive fire erupted in reply. Submachine guns poured burning bursts toward the bunkers, even though the bullets sparked uselessly off cursed plating. Marksmen popped shots toward firing slits, hoping to catch a glimpse of meat through the murder holes. Flamethrower crews angled their nozzles toward the breaches, sending arcs of fire just short of their targets, more putting on a display than posing any real danger. It wasn't to kill, it was to distract. Engineers rushed forward, low and fast, packs of explosives clutched in their arms like sacred burdens. Mud soaked their boots. Shrapnel hissed over their heads. One was torn apart by a chain gun burst, but another rolled behind a forward culvert and kept moving. Two more made it to the edge of the wire-choked zone before the bunkers. They didn't stop. Satchel charges were armed. From cover, Stahl roared something wordless and primal. One engineer hurled his pack with a full-body swing, the charge landing flush against the base of a pyramid's flank. The other slid beneath a tangle of rebar and vanished from view. The world jumped as the first charge detonated. Fire and black metal surged skyward, briefly blotting out the guns. As the smoke rose, so did the Stoßtruppen. They ran again, through fire, through ash, toward the smoking wound now torn open in the side of Hell's fortress. The breach belched smoke and slag, its edges lined with twitching rebar and the mangled limbs of heretic defenders. The Stoßtruppen pressed toward it, weapons raised, ready to plunge into the bunker's innards. And then the Sin Eater stepped through. Each step of the infernal creature were thunderous. A walking fortress of flesh and iron, the Sin Eater was encased in crude plating welded straight into swollen meat. Scraps of looted armor fused with its bloated frame like barnacles on a drowned beast. Its limbs were thick as siege columns, each step causing the ground to shudder beneath its weight. Great chains dragged behind it, some embedded in its back. Others looped around its neck like the relics of failed bindings. What might have once been a face was now a war mask of rusted bronze, stretched over a gaping maw of tusks and gnashing uneven teeth. From that mouth issued a chant, a hideous, gluttonous litany echoing with the timbre of stolen sermons and the choking cries of devoured men. The Stoßtruppen opened fire without hesitation. Bullets struck its armor with sharp, metallic pings, ricocheting off the crude plating or embedding harmlessly in layers of fused steel and flesh. Chunks of slagged metal and torn hide flew loose, but the Sin Eater only roared with laughter and shrieked with delight, its laughter bubbling like rot in a barrel. One Prussian leapt forward with a bayonet, only for the Sin Eater to seize him with a grotesquely nimble arm, dragging him in and stuffing the screaming soldier into its chest, its skin splitting like cooked fat to consume him whole. 3 more fell before it. Still, the Stoßtruppen pressed in, blades flashing, flames hissing. The Sin Eater killed them almost as fast as they came, yet there was no hesitation. They threw themselves at him as they were more than eager to give their lives to try and buy an opening to fell the infernal champion. Then came the clash of iron. The Feldkaplan entered the fray, his armoured boots striking the floor like the tolling of cathedral bells. In one hand he bore his censer, now chained to a flanged mace the size of a man's torso, its head inscribed with runes of wrath and exorcism. His visor glowed with the light of holy oil burning within. He said no words, only charged. The Sin Eater shrieked and met him. Steel clanged on flesh, blessed metal biting deep into corrupted bulk. The 2 titans traded blows, one a vessel of sacred fury, the other a monument to hunger unbound. The Stoßtruppen surged around the duel, vaulting debris and fallen bodies as they pressed deeper into the breached fortification. They gave the duel its space, but wasted no time in idling. Orders were shouted, grenades lobbed, and steel boots thundered through the corridors of blasphemy. while the Feldkaplan fought the bloated spawn of sin beneath the shattered sigils of the demonic pyramid. The war around them raged on. Flame and fury drove the Prussians forward, cutting deeper into the bunker's black heart. The duel before him was nothing short of mythic. Two shapes wreathed in smoke and shadow, one clad in sanctified steel, the other in blasphemous flesh and scrap. They moved with impossible speed, as if unbound by the mortal weight of their forms. The Sin-Eater lunged and twisted with grotesque agility, its enormous mass quivering with every pivot. The Feldkaplan met each strike with crushing purpose, mace howling as it cleaved through air and seared flesh alike. It was a battle from the old epics, holy wrath against gluttonous damnation. But Stahl had no time for awe. He gave the dueling giants one last glance, then turned and ran. Smoke and muzzle flashes lit the hallways like lightning inside a cathedral. His men were already pressing on, clearing rooms with grenades and gunfire, flames licking at the dark recesses of the heretic stronghold. Stahl leapt over a shattered bulkhead, his boot striking stone as he entered the pyramid. The air was thicker inside, greasy, tainted, and thrumming with distant infernal chants. The walls pulsed faintly with red sigils, etched in ichor and blood. Somewhere deep within, the enemies of the Free State of Prussia waited, and Stahl was coming for them. The Prussians advanced like a tide of steel and flame through the pyramid's foul innards. Passageways lined with cracked iconography and blood-crusted bone gave way to catacombs of supply, where the air reeked of cordite, tallow, and heretic incense. It was there they found it, the munitions vault. Crates of ammunition stamped with infernal glyphs lined the walls, surrounded by half-burnt offerings and extinguished ward candles. Engineers descended upon the site without needing orders, setting charges and daisy-chaining wires with silent efficiency. Others stacked the crates against choke points, turning the vault into both bomb and bulwark. Then the screaming began. The heretics were coming back. From side tunnels and shrines, a counter-attack surged forth. Zealots in stained vestments, ragged gunners, and armored brutes wearing masks fashioned the nobles of hell. They came howling with blades and corrupted weapons, their footsteps pounding like a storm in the dark. The Stoßtruppen met them with disciplined violence. Submachine guns lit the narrow halls in bursts of fire and blood. A grenadier hurled a charge down the corridor, sending limbs flying. Krine's flame unit roared to life, wreathing the lead attackers in a curtain of cleansing fire. Yet the heretics pressed harder. 2 Stoßtruppen fell. One bled out against a wall of flensed bone. Another was dragged into the dark screaming, his voice cut short with a thump when he detonated a grenade on his belt. "Hold the line," Stahl barked, over the roar of flame and shrieking metal. Engineers completed the charges and began pulling back, shouting the confirmation, "Set," over the din. Stahl grabbed the detonator and laid down cover fire as another wave of heretics pressed the threshold. As they completed their work and began to pull out of the twisted fortification, 3 Stoßtruppen turned back toward the firelight. They did not ask. They did not wait. Silent and knowing, they peeled away from the retreating line and returned to the munitions chamber. Stahl caught the eye of one, a corporal with a mangled pauldron and blood crusted in his beard. The man gave a curt nod. Stahl returned it. Without ceremony, the 3 took positions behind overturned crates and slagged walls. Their weapons were low on ammunition, but their eyes burned bright. They would hold the vault, give their comrades time to clear the pyramid, and when the time came, they would give themselves fully. "Fall back," Stahl roared. "Get clear." The remaining Stoßtruppen surged back through the corridors, weapons flashing behind them as the ones who stayed behind sealed the way with gunfire and grit. The sound of heretic war chants chased them, growing louder, closer, more frenzied. The charge was armed. The time had not yet come. But it would, and when it did, the last three would be there to make sure Hell's fortress burned. The Prussians burst from the pyramid smoking more, just in time to see the Sin Eater falter. The massive creature reeled back, its armor cracked and bleeding foul smoke, chunks of flesh sloughing from its frame. The Feldkaplan moved like a wrathful vision from scripture, his flanged mace a blur of sacred steel, carving righteous arcs into the towering abomination. For a moment, all sound seemed to dull. Only the clash of iron and the bellowing wail of the Sin Eater rang out across the blasted trench line. The creature swung a rusted limb in desperation, smashing through shattered barricades, but the priest ducked beneath the blow and drove his mace into its gut with a roar. The blow split the Sin Eater wide. A gout of black ichor erupted skyward as the beast fell, trembling, arms spasming as it collapsed beneath its own bulk. Its death rattle was a chorus of sobbing voices and bubbling blasphemies that guttered out in a last gurgling prayer. The Feldkaplan stood still, his armor coated in black gore, censer hissing at his side. He did not look to the Prussians as they regrouped beyond the pyramid's breach. He merely raised his mace skyward, letting its runes glow against the smoke-choked sky. Stahl watched only for a second before turning to his men. "We move," he said. And they did, toward the final withdrawal point, with the pyramid behind them and the judgment of fire still waiting to fall. They moved quickly, boots pounding through the cratered mire beyond the pyramid, the smoke behind them thick with the stench of blood and burning iron. The withdrawal was grim but orderly. The wounded were dragged or carried, but there was no hesitation. Every Stoßtrupp knew what came next. Stahl reached the designated ridgeline and turned, breath heaving behind his rebreather. The pyramid loomed, its once pristine angles now warped and cracked, coughing smoke from every vent and wound. Heretic silhouettes moved frantically within the breaches. Too late, too slow. He lifted the detonator. A silent moment passed. Then Stahl pressed the switch. The pyramid screamed. It began with a low, grinding groan from within its depths, then a sudden, blooming roar. The charges placed deep in its munitions vault ignited in sequence. A shockwave rippled outward as the central chamber ruptured, folding the bunker in on itself. Fire leapt from every seam, blowing apart metal, stone, and shrieking flesh. A black pillar of flame surged into the sky, carrying with it the echoes of 1,000 heretic deaths. The ground shuddered. The wind carried with it the scorched stink of brimstone and unclean souls. Stahl watched as the pyramid's top caved inward, a final death rattle from a fortress too proud to fall easily. Its demon-forged structure burned from within, finally silenced. He said nothing. He only lowered the detonator and turned from the blaze. From the ridge, Stahl surveyed the battlefield. The haze had begun to lift, revealing more of the shattered horizon. In the distance, several other pyramids, marked by the sigils of distant heresies, shuddered and burst like overripe fruit. Great plumes of fire reached skyward, blooming into the dark with the force of sacred vengeance. One after another, the abominations cracked, their walls peeled apart by flame and fury as other assault teams completed their holy work. And yet, not all fell. Beyond the rising smoke, some pyramids still stood, monolithic, patient, watching. Their surfaces glistened with fresh wards, and Stahl thought he saw movement along the uppermost ramparts, new silhouettes, gathering, reinforcements, ritualists. It did not matter. Not yet. He lingered a moment longer, the fire reflected in his visor, before turning to his men. They stood quiet, rifles low, breath steaming in the cold. Behind them, the pyramid smouldered, another wound carved deep into the heretic front. But it had not been a killing thrust. Across the blasted horizon, the sigil-stamped silhouettes of other pyramids still loomed, some burning, some broken, but many more untouched, defiant in the distance. This strike had struck deep, had hurt, had shaken the enemy. But it had not ended them. The Stoßtruppen nodded once. There was no triumph in their gaze, only grim resolve. They turned from the flames, retreating into the fog, already thinking of the next breach, the next wall of flame, the next righteous assault. They returned to the chapel at dusk. What little remained of the structure stood quiet in the darkening mist, just scorched stone and fractured iconography beneath a sky thick with smoke. The fires on the horizon still flickered, distant and cold. The Stoßtruppen arrived in staggered clusters, moving with the weight of men who had passed through hell and clawed their way back out. Stahl stood at the broken arch, where once a door had hung, and counted as they filtered in. The tally was grim. A little over half had returned. There were no cries, no songs, no speeches, only the sound of boots on broken flagstones, the wet rasp of strained breath, and the creak of gear too saturated with blood to sit right. None had returned clean. Some bled from shallow wounds stitched hastily mid-retreat. Others wore the stains of the men and things they had killed. Black gore, stone dust, and the reek of roasted flesh clung to armor and cloth alike. One trooper staggered past with a bandaged stump where his left hand had been. Another held a blood-slick blade, too numb to notice the gash across his cheek. Stahl said nothing. He stepped into the nave and looked up at the shattered saint. Moonlight cut through the ribs of the ruin, casting long shadows over the survivors as they sat or slumped along the edges of the pews. A few lit candles again, small flickers of stubborn devotion in the gloom. They would rest here briefly. They would mourn quietly. Then they would begin again. The Duke's spear had struck deep, but the war was not done, and Stahl knew it would not be long before they marched once more. They vanished into the mist as the echoes of distant detonations rolled across the horizon. Stahl marched in silence, the weight of victory pressing heavier than any defeat. The men moved with him, not joyous, not triumphant, but steady, unyielding. Behind them, the earth still burned. The smouldering remains of the pyramid marked a scar carved deep into the flesh of the heretic line. But a scar is not a kill. They would regroup in the shadowed hills. They would rearm, reforge, plot their next thrust into the heart of the heretical defenses. Somewhere beyond that rising smoke, other commanders of the Free State were drawing maps, assigning charges, murmuring prayers, and the Stoßtruppen would be at the tip of the blade once more. For now, the fire smouldered, the blood cooled, the ash settled, but the war did not end. It never ends, and the Duke's spear would fly again, until every unholy fortress was ash, and every heretic screamed silence beneath the boots of men who knew only how to advance.